Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farbach. No one will take a weak and divided Europe seriously, neither an enemy nor an ally, warned Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk after the U.S. raid that removed Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro, an operation that has exposed tensions between power politics and international law. To talk more about all this, we're joined by Renata Mieńkowska-Norkiene, political scientist at the University of Warsaw. Good to have you back on TVP World, Professor. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
With this quote here, Professor, if we might, how do we interpret this in terms of, it's a bit cautious. It doesn't go directly against what's happened in Venezuela. How does this impact and guide Poland's policy towards all this, what happened in the last few days?
Well, it's a very complicated and complex situation in which we are now. And I think that Donald Tusk also has to very much be aware of what he says and how his words may be taken by the public and, of course, by the Polish allies. First and foremost, I think that there are those calls to gain the European unity, full unity, which we don't have at the moment, even as regards this first statement that the European Union has actually issued on what has just happened in Venezuela and in the United States. So Donald Tusk probably calls for unity, also knowing that what happened in Venezuela is definitely a beginning, if not the final stamp on American effort to sort of legitimize a very new world order in which, unfortunately, neither Europe nor, and here even more, Poland can be certain they will be among those who decide about where they will be in the future. So from that angle, definitely Poland and in particular the European Union should gather together, should defeat any potential and any already existing differences, and try to finally act according to the number of inhabitants of the European Union, to its economic strength and its political power as well. I think this is how we should interpret that. Otherwise, we are sentenced to be either in a full decision of the United States, or to be marginalized, generally speaking.
All right. Interesting. You point out, you said the situation is legally complex, and from the Prime Minister's statement in Poland, but it's also exactly what the German Chancellor said as well. So keeping it on this very ambiguity. We have very strong words from the Spanish government who've really come out and criticized what's happening in Venezuela. On this unity, I'm just curious, I mean, where does this lead Europe? I mean, there's already this constant effort to find unity on different issues. Now the strategic ambiguity. Where does Europe come together on this, if at all?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because, yes, indeed, we have this Spanish unity with, well, unwanted, but still unity with Russia and China, who condemned what happened. But obviously the Spanish reasoning behind all this is very different, because Spain is supporting rather the society of Venezuela than the regime of Maduro. The point is that I think that the United States have put the European Union and the whole world in a very awkward situation, the ambiguous situation, as you mentioned, because on the one hand, obviously, Maduro was a dictator. He is a dictator, but now in front of the American court. But he was a dictator, and really no one cries after him. On the other hand, we know that the style in which he was suppressed from his post obviously undeserved, but still it was something that may be followed both by Americans themselves, speaking about Greenland, for example, and what he says about Greenland, and also about other countries in Latin America or in this American hemisphere. So yes, the European Union does not really know how to react fully. Therefore, all those first reactions were very cautious, very careful. without, let's say, any signs of, let's say, emotional or ad hoc reactions. Now the European Union, in its own style, obviously, has to come to some kind of a common, well, joint position, joint statement. And this requires, obviously, much more than just unity, which would unite Friedrich Merz and Pedro Sanchez, not to speak about, of course, the Hungarian prime minister, but it requires way more, namely a full awareness of the European Union, where it wants to be in 5 years' time, in 1 year time, in 10 years' time. And if this happens, if the European Union finally realizes what it wants to be on this international scene in those very new conditions, in which we know that the international law does not protect us anymore. Neither the European Union as a transnational, let's say, entity, nor specific states, member states of the European Union, which are middle-sized or small, because this was our strength, this international order in which some rules and law really mattered. Now it does not matter anymore. And therefore, I would say that we need to find ourselves in this new situation as the whole European Union and all the member states together. Like the EU has to decide finally about Mercosur, and it has to make this decision because this is of such a significance, and we still don't have this unity here. So it will have to both think strategically as well as really take tactic steps to strengthen its actual position on international scene, both economically, militarily, as well as politically, in particular politically.
We mentioned very briefly Russia and China. I want to jump on also on their reaction. From the Chinese. The Chinese historically have been one of the biggest buyers of Venezuelan oil. There was a special deal made out in 2007. Even Marco Rubio said this over the weekend, saying that this was very much, they didn't want any sort of adversaries of the U.S. to have any control of the oil. What do we make of China's position on all this? I mean, they did condemn this, but I mean, it said they're deeply shocked at these hegemonic acts. I mean, but is that strong enough words? Are we expecting more reaction from Beijing and all this?
You see, the point is also in this ambiguous reaction of the European Union, or basically hardly any clear reaction, it shows how complicated the situation is. Indeed, the United States, so Donald Trump, has just made a huge relief to the European Union because it stopped this Chinese domination in Venezuela, which was extremely dangerous for all of us, because Venezuela having this specific type of oil, which the Chinese, they really, let's say, they work on it in particular. They have infrastructure which is adjusted to this type of oil, and they used it a lot. And Russia actually was an intermediary in all this and benefited a lot from this. So for both China and Russia, it means way less income. For China, it's also a kind of, I would say, even substantive threat, in a sense that they will now have to rethink their strategy vis-a-vis Venezuela, the United States, Europe, and Taiwan. Because on the one hand, you mentioned properly, yes, the Chinese will lose to some extent because they will lose their impact on Venezuela and, of course, the cheap oil which they could proceed. However, on the other hand, China got from the United States a gift of a precedent which they could now use against Taiwan. But you see, the big question is if they will do it in the nearest future. You know, if Donald Trump has just overtaken Venezuela, but the question is also who is going to be there and who is going to rule, because for the moment it's actually a person, so the vice president, from the surroundings of both Hugo Chavez and now Nicolas Maduro. So I don't think she will be really very much in favor of deep cooperation with the United States. They will have to do something about that, not to speak about, calming down the society and really maintaining this, for the moment, I would say, very optimistic perspective of the society and perception of the whole situation. So, it's really difficult. And if China decides to do something about Taiwan, for example, like to install there in an American style some government, I don't know, whoever. Of course, it will not go unnoticed, so it will probably has its consequences, but they can always use it on the forum of the United Nations or generally in their rhetorics. Well, we weren't the first ones, right? It's Donald Trump who actually did it. Why not us? But I'm not sure if it will happen in the nearest future. I think China will observe. They are very good at just pretending that they are not involved, of course, condemning, sure, because for their interest, it's dangerous. But on the other hand, they will seek for other options and maybe for options of coming back to Venezuela, making this chaos in Venezuela that most probably will occur in the nearest future even bigger and probably benefit from that.
Right. And speaking of the nearest future, we have the Coalition of the Willing that's gathering on Tuesday today. When Ukraine obviously is going to be center stage to that. What of Russia in all this? I mean, I kind of want to layer this question for you in terms of what your expectations are of this coalition meeting, how this is all impacted by what's happened in Venezuela, and Russia's role in all this, and how we gauge their reaction.
You see, the problem is that we are not sure about actual Russians' involvement in all that. We are not sure whether he had any deal with America on that. If so, of course, then it's extremely dangerous for both Ukraine and the European Union, so us. If there was no deal with the Russians, they might be in shock because for them, of course, it means way less income from this involvement in Venezuela. And this can be also for Russians another step, I mean, towards some unpredicted for us now movements, because it would mean that Russia will get even poorer and Putin will have to take decisions which will try to explain all the situation in economy, in Russia's economy, which is obviously worse and worse to the citizens. And from that point of view, I think if it wasn't really a deal with Americans, but we are not sure about that, it may mean that Russia got just weakened by the whole situation. And this can strengthen our position as those members of the Coalition of the Willing who may support Ukraine, because it means that if we steadily, constantly and consistently support Ukraine, and if we really maintain also our position here, that Russia may get, by getting poorer, may also get less and less impact on the front line, actually, and on the situation in Ukraine. And in the end, there may be some ad hoc movements of Vladimir Putin, which may cost him a lot as regards this operation in Ukraine. However, there might be other consequences of the situation in Venezuela. Maybe if Donald Trump in the next step goes towards Greenland, then we may have a problem as NATO, where we are together. So a majority of the European countries are together with America, with Turkey also, and Canada and so on. We may have a huge problem with deciding what to do now. I mean, one of the NATO members sort of invaded another NATO member to overtake its territory. It can be very tricky, in particular since Greenland is not.
Well, we don't quite. Let's not jump ahead too much. I mean, Professor, the Greenland issue is still something we'll have to discuss.
In Ukraine,
yeah, but we'll obviously have to see.
Here, the European Union again, it will have to show, and of course, the Coalition of the Willing will have to show definitely a strong support to Ukraine, and now count more on Putin getting weaker and weaker, and first and foremost poorer and poorer.
Right. So I think
which can happen, actually.
The operative word here through this discussion was that it will remain complex for sure as we look how it all unfolds over the next few days. So always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
It gets more and more complex.
For all that. Thank you, Professor Renata Mieńkowska-Norkiene. Much appreciated. And thank you for watching World Talks. That concludes this edition, but stay tuned right here on TVP World for more. Goodbye.